The Islamic Foundation presents Lessons from the Life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Part 2.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah alladhi khalaqa kulla shay'in fa ahsana khalqahu wa tartiba wa addaba nabiyahu Muhammadan sallallahu alayhi wasallam fa ahsana ta'diba wa zaka awsafahu wa akhlaqahu thumma ittakhadahu safiyahu wa habiba wa waffaqa lil-iqtida'i bihi man arada tahdhiba wa harrama 'an at-takhalluq bi akhlaqihi man arada takhyiba wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin sayyidil mursalin وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا وقلبا خاشعا ولسانا ذاكرا وشفاء من كل داء يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم الحمد لله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It's a great pleasure and an honor for me to be part of the nightly lecture series and programs that the Islamic Foundation is put together so that we can try to take advantage of this time to appreciate we can take advantage of this time to benefit, and inshallah we can look back at this time as a time when we were able to gain a greater appreciation for our religion, inculcate more of the ibadat in our lives, and hopefully emerge from this as better individuals and better families and better communities, inshallah. The topic that I've been asked to speak about for today and perhaps some of future sessions as well is life lessons from the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what I wanted to talk about today is an event that is very well known to many of us, but to analyze it in a little bit of detail, which is not necessarily the Isra and the Mi'raj. We're all very familiar with that, mashallah, and in fact many of us may have just recently read about it a few weeks ago with the on the 27th of Rajab. But instead what I wanted to talk about is the immediate aftermath. What happens after the Prophet ﷺ returns back to Mecca, and the first day or two, what are things that we can learn from that happen in terms of how various people reacted and responded, and what is the deeper lesson that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to tell us from this incident. So we'll start off by saying that we know that when the Prophet ﷺ went on the Isra and the Mi'raj, it is the latter Meccan period. This is a time when the animosity and Islamophobia against the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims is at an all-time high, and they have just emerged now from the boycott they had, where 2 years they're in the valley of Abi Talib. His beloved wife, our mother Khadija radiallahu anha, has passed away. His uncle, his protector, for all intents and purposes, his only parent figure, has also died, and the majority reports are, of course, that he dies not as a Muslim, and this, of course, grieves and pains the Prophet ﷺ immensely. So this is a period of great tribulation and turmoil for him ﷺ personally, but also for the fledgling Muslim ummah at that time. And Allah Ta'ala has now rewarded and gifted the Prophet ﷺ with such a gift that no other Nabi alayhi salam would ever receive. But the interesting question is, now that he's gone on this journey, now he has to come back, and they've already rejected him. They've already rejected the message, and now he has to convey this, that he went in one night from Mecca to Jerusalem, and then led all the prophets alayhim salam in prayer, and from there went on this night journey of the Mi'raj to the highest of heavens, and was in the closest physical proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than any other of his creation had ever been. So just imagine that already they didn't believe him, and now he has to convey this to them. And this is the honesty and the integrity of the Prophet ﷺ that we should appreciate, that he's not shy, he doesn't feel embarrassed, he doesn't feel, oh my gosh, they're going to just completely laugh at me and think I'm a crazy person. Because in some ways they had already called him every name in the book. They had already called him a soothsayer, a kahin. They'd already called him a poet, a sha'ir. They'd already called him a madman, a majnoon. So in some ways he had very little to lose, as if to say that they already think this of me, and my job is I'm supposed to convey the truth for whatever Allah Ta'ala has asked me to convey. So he goes and tells them this. And of course, for the Quraysh, for the chieftains of the Quraysh, the Abu Jahls and these sorts of people, they're having a field day with this. In other words, they're saying that they're laughing, they're celebrating, that they're saying that this really takes the cake. This has to prove that this man is crazy. He cannot be a prophet. He's making up all sorts of fairy tales. None of this can be real. And so the fledgling Muslim community at that time, it's a very difficult situation for them, because not everybody would be like Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But the real test for the Muslims is that Iman, faith, is not based on rationality or intellect alone. These are secondary tools, and these are important tools, and not say that we don't use these tools at all. But Iman is not about us. It's not about what we can see. It's not about what we can hear, but rather it is believing in what the Prophet ﷺ has told. So in other words, the Isra and the Mi'raj, it's not about us, this incident in particular, but rather it is about the Prophet ﷺ. And the test for the believers at that time, and the test for us in general about the Prophet ﷺ, is about whether we will testify and bear witness about who the Prophet ﷺ was, what he stood for, and what he says. That do we believe, even if we think intellectually or rationally or scientifically or whatever we want to, whatever criteria we can think about, that it doesn't make sense. This shouldn't be possible. So that's the test that's being asked of the Muslims at this time, is that the Quraysh now, they basically go around asking every single Muslim that they could find that, do you know what your so-called prophet, hasha lillah, but your so-called prophet, what he's saying? That he's saying that he went to Jerusalem, went to the heavens, rode this mystical beast, he spoke to God, he saw all of these things. Do you believe this? And this was the test that was given to them. And one of the first people they go to, of course, is Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu an, the closest friend of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and very, almost evil brilliantly. I'm blanking on the word for what would be brilliant, but sort of in an evil way, diabolically. They try to go to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh because they figure this is his closest friend, his companion. There's no way that he's going to verify this. There's no way he's going to believe this. Even he's going to have to realize that his friend is crazy, and he's going to have to denounce him. So they go to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. He listens very patiently, and then he says that I believe, I verify, and I testify that everything that if he says this, it is true. And note that the Prophet ﷺ doesn't go and talk to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. There's not enough time. They go and quickly go to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. They tell him that this is what the Prophet ﷺ is saying. And he says these very famous words. He says, Wallahi, لَإِن كَانَ قَالَهُ لَقَدْ صَدَقَ فما يعجبكم من ذلك فوالله إنه ليخبرني أن الخبر لا يأتيه من السماء إلى الأرض في ساعة من ليل أو نهار فأصدقه فهذا أبعد مما تعجبون منه. In other words, he says, by Allah, if he has said this, then it must be true. He has spoken the truth. And why are you astonished with that? Because by Allah, he informs me that news, in other words, wahi, comes to him from the heavens to the earth in the span of an hour in the night or in the day, and I believe that. And what you are telling me is, and what you are sort of astonished with, this fact that I believe in wahi, that is even more remarkable than what you are telling me with. In other words, he verifies what the Prophet ﷺ has said. So he doesn't question what happened because he knows who it has happened to. So the lesson here is that he's not worried about the what. He's not worried about the why. He's worried about the who. And he knows the who is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is where and when he gets his beautiful name and his title of as-Siddiq, right? Because the epitome of as-Siddiq is the one who confirms. Now, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh isn't confirming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah doesn't need confirmation, but he's confirming the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam without even having heard what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quraysh go to him thinking that they can deter him and get him to turn away from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he realizes that that if this is what that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying, then I'm going to believe it. I don't need to have proof. I don't need to have any evidences. And so this is why he gets that title of as-Siddiq, because he confirms what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says. And so this is why Iman for us is not about what we can understand. It's not about what we can prove to ourselves. It is about whether or not we will believe that what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told us, do we believe that as to be true, and whether we accordingly follow that. Now, secondarily, yes, we should, use our intellect and our observation to get secondary proofs by, as the Quran says, to look at the heaven and the moon and the stars and all of that to kind of get confirmation or affirmation of faith. But ultimately, Iman, the primary source of it and the primary reason for it is very simple, that we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because this is what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has conveyed to us. So this is the test of the Muslims, that will you have this Iman bil ghaib, faith in the unseen, based simply on that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said it. So this is the paradigm, that Islam is not about what we think or what we want it to be, but Islam is about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and whether we can confirm, just like as Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu did at this particular time, that can we confirm through our words and through our actions that yes, we accept and we believe whatever the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told us to be true, that we will accept that. So that is one of the major lessons that come out from this. The second lesson that comes out from this is that the Quraysh were the ones who previously had asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, if you really are a prophet, then why can't we see the angels? Why can't you bring us a sign from the heaven? Why can't you bring us an angel with you or a treasure from the heaven? So they're the ones that had asked to see signs. Now, the Prophet ﷺ on this journey, as it comes in Surah An-Najm, لَقَدْ رَأَى مِنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِ الْكُبْرَى, that he saw the greatest of the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, he didn't need to see that sign in order to believe, but yet Allah ta'ala showed him that particular sign. So the message that is being told to the Quraysh is that you keep asking for these signs. You want to see treasures and the angels, and you want to even see Allah. But don't you see that we are already giving you these signs? You won't be able to handle seeing anything else, so be satisfied with what you're seeing and believe. Right? So sometimes when we ask to see signs, it may be too late, or we may not be able to we may not be capable of seeing those signs. So we look at, for example, in the story of Musa and Fir'aun, that Fir'aun also wanted to see Allah. Right? He told Haman, فَأَوْقِدْ لِي يَا هَامَانُ عَلَى الطِّينِ فَجَعَلْ لِي صَرْحًا لَعَلِّي أَطَّلِعُ إِلَى إِلَهِ مُوسَى. He told his chief engineers to build him this tower so that he could see Allah. He wanted to gaze upon the Lord of Musa, he said. إِلَى إِلَهِ Musa. Right? حَاشَ لِلَّهِ. And at the moment of his drowning, he sees that sign. He sees and he recognizes who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, because as he's about to be drowned, he says that I believe in the Lord of the Bani Israel. But Allah says, Al-ana wa qad asayta qablu wa kunta min al-mufsidin. Now you're going to believe, and you rebelled and you're among the mischief makers. So in other words, Fir'aun also wanted to see a sign. He did get to see it, but it was too late for him. And so that sign didn't benefit him. Similarly, Musa alayhi salam asked Allah Ta'ala to show him himself, right? He wanted to, Rabbi arini anzur ilayk. And show me yourself so that I can gaze upon you. Now this was not that, obviously Musa alayhi salam had iman, but he wanted to sort of not only verify, but he wanted to sort of have this pleasure of gazing upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah told him that لن تراني ولكن انظر إلى الجبل فإن استقر مكانه فسوف تراني. He says that you're not going to be able to see me, but rather look upon this mountain and see what happens to that mountain if you really want to be able to see me. And of course we know that when Allah unveiled a small portion of himself to that mountain, the mountain basically exploded, and then Musa alayhi salam himself fell unconscious, فَخَرَّ صَاعِقًا, that he fell unconscious, and but yet Allah's mercy to him was that when he regained consciousness, he then tells Allah Ta'ala that I believe, even though I didn't see the sign, right? He fainted, he didn't actually get to see the sign. So here you have two examples. Fir'aun saw the sign that he was looking for. Musa alayhi salam wanted to see the sign. He didn't get to see it because he fell unconscious. Musa alayhi salam benefited, Fir'aun didn't. So now in the context of this, the night journey, the Isra and the Mi'raj, the sign that is being told to the Muslims is that don't ask for much more than this, because you already have among you the greatest sign, which is the Prophet ﷺ himself, and the fact that revelation comes. These are the two signs that you need. That's what Abu Bakr radiallahu anh understood, right? Because he says, إِنَّهُ لَيَخْبِرُنِي. He says, he's the one who informs me that revelation, that the khabar, revelation comes to him in the night and the day. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anh recognized that these are the two signs, that's all he needed, which is the fact that the Prophet ﷺ was there and that wahi was coming to them, that this was enough for him to believe. And so similarly now the Muslims at that time, that this is the test of them, that are you going to be like Fir'aun? Are you going to be like the Quraysh and ask for signs that won't benefit you? And even they're being warned against being like Musa alayhi salam, because at least Musa had the insurance policy, so to speak, which is that he already had iman. And Allah is telling the Muslims that don't ask for more because you may not be able to handle it. Musa alayhi salam was able to regain consciousness, but you may not be able to regain consciousness. You may basically be destroyed if you ask for too much. So this night journey is such a powerful sign. It is brighter than the light of the sun, but because it's been filtered through the Prophet ﷺ, who's the lens for this sign, we are able to understand it and we are able to appreciate it and gain the various lessons that come from it. So that's the second lesson that comes about asking for signs and whether or not we'll be able to handle and understand those signs. The third thing is that after this response of the Quraysh that they hear from Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, they go and ask the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam all sorts of questions about the logistics of the Isra. They don't ask about the Mi'raj. They don't ask about the ascension into the heavens. They ask him about these questions about, well, if you really went to Jerusalem, can you tell us about the caravans that are on the way, or tell us about some landmarks that you'd seen along the way? Because they knew he had never been to Jerusalem. He had obviously been to Syria several times, at least 2 or 3 times that we know of recorded, and probably multiple other times during his travels when he served as the merchant with Khadija radiallahu anha's company. But he had never been to Jerusalem. So they begin to ask him all these logistics about where is this caravan, where is this landmark, and this and that. So they don't ask him about the Mi'raj, because if they asked him about the Mi'raj, that would mean that they have accepted him as a prophet. So they're also, again, very diabolically clever. They ask him about the signs of the Isra because they feel that they can disprove him on the Isra, then they don't have to try to disprove him on the Mi'raj. So the Prophet ﷺ patiently responds and tells them all of the questions that they ask. And of course, when those caravans come, they are able to verify some of the news that he tells them. But the third lesson here is that the Quraysh are more concerned about the logistics of the Isra, the small details, whereas the Muslims were more interested, obviously, about the Mi'raj. They were interested about greater and more important and more loftier things. So this now sets up sort of a dichotomy between the unbelievers, who are always interested in the little nitty-gritty details, the logistics of things, whereas the believers are told to be more concerned about, the bigger picture. What did the Prophet ﷺ see in every single heaven? And of course, the greatest of those gifts and the greatest of those things to be concerned about was now the institutionalization of the 5 daily prayers. So for the believers, those are the logistics that we care about, which is basically salah and things pertaining to the akhirah. But for those who deny and those who don't believe, they're more concerned about these little things. And that's why you see when the Islamophobes attack the deen, it's always based on things like, well, how old was our mother Aisha radiallahu anha? What happened with this particular incident? What happened with that particular incident? Because on the broader level, the bigger messages and the bigger details of Islam, which is Tawheed, Akhirah, Risala, these sorts of things, there's not an argument to be made against it. And in some ways, they're not interested in it. And so they will try to bog us down with these little details. And similarly, that's what the Quraysh did, is that they knew they couldn't fight the Prophet ﷺ on the Mi'raj, because if they were to even have that conversation, the admission that they would make is that he, of course, is Rasulullah. And they weren't willing to do that, so they wanted to fight him on all these little details, which even on that ground, they lost. Right? So that's the third lesson, which is about what are the things that we should be concerned about versus the things that we should not be concerned about. The next lesson is that, unfortunately, some of the Muslims, they left Islam after this event because of the pressure of the Quraysh, because of their not being satisfied with the logistics of how could this be possible, how did this happen. Alhamdulillah, the vast majority of the Muslims believed and they confirmed what the Prophet ﷺ said, but there were a few Muslims who did leave Islam, right? Allahu A'lam whether or not they came back after that, but that is sort of the scary thing, which is that, especially for many young people who get exposed to all sorts of these other ideologies, they read these books, they come across these thinkers like Dawkins and this and that, and they kind of become very enamored by them, and because they're not able to formulate a response, and perhaps we as elder people were not able to provide them with an adequate response, then they have these questions that can't be answered, and of course we know, and unfortunately, na'udhu billah, may Allah protect our community from this, but people do leave Islam because of this. And so this was a test for the Muslims, that are you able to believe in the Prophet ﷺ? Are you able to ignore the logistics for your own faith, but at the same time have knowledge of the logistics, have knowledge of how to respond to these challenges, so that people, when they do ask these questions, that their questions are answered appropriately and people don't leave the deen. And then the final thing that we should appreciate is the fact that the Prophet ﷺ in this incident goes to Jerusalem, then from there goes to heaven, and then comes back, to the earth, basically. That this now represents sort of the shifting of the lines in terms of the legacy, the prophetic legacy, which was through Ibrahim alayhi salam, all along had been through the line of Ishaq alayhi salam to the Bani Israel. The Bani Ismail didn't have any prophet, as we very well know, until the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so we know that, for example, the Muslims would now pray towards Bayt al-Maqdis, and while in Mecca, they were able to orient themselves in such a way that they could position the Kaaba between themselves and Bayt al-Maqdis. And eventually, 2 years later, after the Hijrah, 2 years after the Hijrah, when they're in Medina, the Qibla will of course be changed and they'll be praying towards the Kaaba once again. But this event is also very symbolic because now it marks the start that the Abrahamic legacy, the legacy of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, is now no longer with Bani Ishaq. It's no longer with Bani Israel, but it is now with Bani Ismail, and it is with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is a watershed moment, and then it becomes finally crystallized and finalized with the changing of the Qibla, which is to say that the true inheritors of the Abrahamic legacy are the Muslims, as by virtue of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why when we say, for example, when we read in the Quran that ما كان إبراهيم يهوديا ولا نصراني, that Ibrahim alayhi salam was neither a Jew nor a Christian, ولكن كان حنيفا مسلما, but rather he was a Muslim, a monotheistic Muslim. وما كان من المشركين. There's the establishment of Ibrahim alayhi salam as a Muslim, and then the establishment of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Muslims as the inheritors of that legacy. إن أولى الناس بإبراهيم للذين اتبعوه وهذا النبي والذين آمنوا, that verily the closest of people to Ibrahim alayhi salam are those who followed him, meaning his own ummah, which is just a very few people. But now وهذا النبي, meaning the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and those who believe. So for the Muslims, this was a huge morale boost because they had a deep love for Ibrahim alayhi salam. And this was now a confirmation that through the virtue of the Prophet ﷺ, they're the ones who are going to be connected to Ibrahim alayhi salam. So these are about 5 or 6 lessons that we can appreciate from the Isra and the Mi'raj, that we can think about, that in this time of Islamophobia and turmoil that the Muslims found themselves in the latter Meccan period. The Isra and the Mi'raj itself is a magnificent event, and many of us are familiar with that. But looking at basically the few days after that event, what happened and what are some lessons we can take from that, I think is also equally fascinating. And that now will set the stage for the remainder of the Meccan period leading up to the Hijrah, that this is how the remainder of that time will play out based on this event of the Isra and the Mi'raj, the lessons that the Muslims understood, the realizations and the conclusions that the Quraysh of Mecca understood, that they would not be able to uproot these people and wipe them out because they confirmed who the Prophet ﷺ is and was, no matter how seemingly nonsensical and irrational the story would be. They understood that the Muslims had something that they could never defeat, and that would really set the stage for the remainder of the seerah. So I think, spending a few minutes as we did today here appreciating this story will now help us to put into context some of the other events that will come in the seerah. So jazakum khairan for your attention. May Allah Ta'ala give us the ability to appreciate some of these lessons. May He subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to believe and to confirm in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even to a fractional ability of what Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu did. May He subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability that our iman and that our amal are based on our belief in Allah Ta'ala and in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and not just based on what we can see or what we can understand. And may He subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to benefit from this event that we have discussed today, as well as all of the seerah. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.